All right, Henrik. I've actually been waiting for this time for quite a while now. So this better be good. Let's just
Mm.
say it's just better be good. But I think it's going to be great. And I think people are going to see why you truly are a leader who cares. So welcome, first of all, to the Leader Who Cares series. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm glad it finally happened.
Well, anticipation is a wonderful thing too. So let's start as is appropriate. If you could briefly introduce yourself with an asterisk of, and this happens with men more often, not what you do in your work and stuff, but where you're from originally, where are you now, a little bit about your family, maybe something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal to the world now. That's always quite interesting. Stuff like that. So you can share a little bit. Let's do it.
Sure. Sure. I live and work in San Francisco these days, but I'm actually from a town in Denmark called Esbjerg, which is 80,000 people. I grew up sort of very working class and sort of, I like to say I grew up in the projects of Denmark, but the projects in Denmark are quite a bit nicer than they are here. But I was very much sort of a working class kid, kind of a bookworm, and pretty regular kid, but definitely had sort of a secret life in books. And I've ended up in San Francisco in 2005, and definitely still feel like a Danish person living here, but I'm certainly no longer the new guy here. Um,
Well, it's
yeah,
interesting. I have a bonus daughter from Denmark, married to my
I,
second son.
you told me that. It's so exciting. Every time Danish people find anything Danish outside of Denmark, such a novelty and cause for celebration. So I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, I think that's where you and us Canucks are the same. We'll always point out, somebody, whether it's a hockey player or an actor or whatever, they're Canadian. They're Canadian.
Exactly, exactly, exactly.
So, as a kid, you talk about that a little bit. Was there, did you have a lemonade stand and entrepreneurial stuff, or were you involved in the community in some way? What were you up to?
I would say that when I look back, I feel like I was an entrepreneur before I started my own company. I would typically be somebody who was like, "Oh, that doesn't exist, but it seems like it should." So I had started I was involved in this like club for musicians. Music was like my big passion as well growing up, and I was involved in this club for musicians because it was really hard to record like CDs and expensive. But I helped run this recording studio so more people could record, and it was just like sort of making the change you want to see in the world. So I think of it as being an entrepreneur before I ever started a company. Frankly, I didn't grow up in a social class where anybody started anything really, or certainly not companies. So I think I just always had this like very independent drive to be like, oh, that seems like I always felt like I had somehow agency and power to act on the world, even though I probably shouldn't have.
It's interesting because, I had something similar. My dad had a job, but was never really an entrepreneur. He did stuff, but never really, and we didn't have those entrepreneurial conversations around the
Mhm.
kitchen table. So you wonder if people really are born with something like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's definitely a very valid nature nurture conversation here because nobody in my family has done anything like that. Nothing like this was ever represented to me in this very sort of homogenous Danish working class environment I grew up in. So there must have been some intrinsic part of it that just was like once you sort of got a taste that the world was big and was out there, wanted to go see what it was all about and just didn't accept rules too much. I wouldn't say I'm more of a rebel than that, but just like this idea that a lot of people, I think, look at the world and say, "Oh, that's just the way it is," and I'm not. Like for instance, like when I'm like trying to call like an airline and they have me hold on hold for like 50 minutes, I'm like melting down because this is clearly a series of choices that people made, and this can be unmade. While other people are more like, well, that's just how it is to call an airline. That's not how my brain works. I'm infuriated by people making choices like that, so I want to go start companies and change it.
Yeah, so we can't work for anybody, right?
No, or have a harder time than the average person accepting things in the world not being the way that we think they should be, so we want to go change them.
Yeah, I wonder who has more stress sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, maybe we all have stress, but it's
No, I think we do in different ways. So, I know you were in the Danish army for a time. How did that impact you?
It's really interesting because in Denmark we have national service, and
Hmm.
people here are often surprised when you hear how it's determined who goes in. You literally go in and draw a number out of a thing, and if your number is in a certain range, you have to go in the army. And it was so weird to decide like a year of your life on such complete randomness. But honestly, I had a really good time in the army. I was like finished high school and some early education, and it's kind of a lot of life skills. I think about the army, if the organizing principle wasn't like weapons and military and things, it's kind of a pretty good set of life skills. You know, you get physically very fit and you learn to work with others, you solve problems. You get a bunch of skills that are really good. So I could say if we could sort of reimagine it, something maybe that looks more like the Peace Corps or something, but like this life education thing away from the books as a young mind and a young character is being formed. I thought of it as a pretty good thing, though I'm not, I never sort of, I'm very sort of pacifist. I'm very much against sort of military might and power. But my time in the military, I remember fondly, and I feel like I learned a lot about myself because when you see yourself in like really sort of physically demanding situation and you sleep out in the snow and other things that you get through in the Danish army, learn to, you get to know yourself in another way.
Yeah, I think I was in what they call the militia for not a whole year. They wanted me to be longer, but about 4 months, and everything from map reading to cleaning guns and knowing how to shoot to first aid and all sorts of stuff. And I think the structure is really good for so many people, to learn. And there's certain countries obviously that are mandatory, like Israel, but so I'd say armed forces in peacetime is probably the best thing you could do,
Yeah.
versus in wartime, which is obviously more dangerous. But it does give you a discipline that can be used in a lot of different places. You talked a little bit about music. Did you realize really young that that was something you liked, and was there a certain instrument that you preferred playing, or were you one of those guys with the guitar, the harmonica, and then something else on all over the
That's
place?
I just I think growing up, music just seemed like the most potent sort of cultural force that was. It was like what we all loved and cared about, and then rather than being sort of a just a recipient of other people's music, I wanted to make my own. And so in my preteens, I started playing guitar, like was in bands, and it was just an amazing thing to be doing. I remember actually sort of a distinct point around 12 years old, stopping playing soccer and starting to play guitar and smoke cigarettes. My health choices were not the best, but
I guess
definitely
so.
it spoke a lot more to me as a young person. I've since given up the cigarettes, but I still play the guitar.
Oh, that's cool. So you could have been the next like Freddie Mercury with Queen or something like that.
In my 20s, I did it for a living for about 5 6 years. What it looked like was just playing a lot of live gigs. It was I wouldn't call it much of a career, but it was for a young person who wasn't sure where life was going to take them. It was a pretty good free life. You had some free time. You got to read a bunch of books and pursue this passion. And then at one point in time, I was like, this is not going to be the rest of my life. I'm glad I did it.
Well, I a lot of times have these discussions because you find out the thread that happens in our lives, and some of it's environmental, some of it's DNA, but they say entrepreneurs are sometimes born, type of deal, and
Right.
sometimes we take for granted what we learn along the way. There was a my sons had a principal who was also a teacher, and he was a professional athlete, and he was a psychologist and everything, and he was able to teach them how dance is like geometry and geometry helps to dance.
Mm.
And so people who didn't like dance but like geometry learned dance, and the people who didn't like geometry but like dance saw the thing, and he was teaching them without them even knowing to some degree.
Yeah.
And same thing with like music, you've got to read notes, or just know it instinctively, and then if you're getting gigs somewhere, you got to figure that out, type of thing, and
Absolutely.
and everything like that, and you're learning along the way, real life.
It definitely had both entrepreneurial aspects of like booking gigs and learning to sell, and but also I had always maintained an interest in computers. I don't know how I came across computers because nobody in my environment had one, but I had like Commodore 64 and sort of early computers like that I would have odd jobs out of school and buy. And I'd always like mixed music and technology. So I learned to sort of program music early on. That actually led to my first startup. That's an intersection of music and technology. But you're totally right that music, it is both this like free flowing artistic expression, but can also be something where there's like math and underlying things. If you master those things, then music could go to a new place. And it did for me. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I find you end up finding a little bit where things are derived from and how they come about when you're involved in some of these things that because every kid comes out of school saying, "Oh, I hate school," or whatever, and like that. But if you can teach it in a way that like real life stuff,
Right.
again, you learn a lot, and you're proving it right now, which is awesome. So
Hmm.
that led you to being an entrepreneur extraordinaire, obviously. Um, and can you share briefly some of the projects and experiences that you've been engaged in? What they were about, the impact, what you felt you accomplished and learned. And I know one I think opened, if I remember, Life Squared. Wasn't that in my hometown of Montreal?
It was. It was. That was actually when I first moved to the States. I worked at a university, and the university was building this.
A
We
pretty
called it
unknown university, right?
it was Stanford, yes, but I have a problematic relationship to all the snobbery around universities in the United States. So I try to not. I
Yeah.
sometimes feel whenever you talk to somebody who went to one of these universities, no matter what the topic, it somehow seems to find its way into the first 60 seconds of conversation.
I know.
But the yeah, we were building this animated archive. Basically, there was this new media artist called Lynn Hirschman, and the university had bought her archives. And then the idea, could you take these art archives and do something interesting with it? You may recall an early virtual environment called Second Life that was sort of fairly popular maybe 15 years ago.
Mm.
And so with Second Life, we built an art exhibit that was shown up at the Fine Arts Museum up in your hometown of Montreal, which was a fabulous experience for me to get to fly up there and install that. It was so good. Beautiful city, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Although I don't miss winter, but it is a beautiful city and people. It's when I tell people if you want to go to Europe cheaper and closer, just go to Montreal. You'll get at least some kind of a taste
I
of
agree.
it, type of thing.
Totally agree.
So tell us about some of the others too. There was it called WebGL camps?
I got very interested in these virtual world setting, and there's a group of scientists at the computer science department at the university that was building one, and we made a company around that. And one of the early enabling technologies was called WebGL, and this essentially allowed you to launch full 3D environments in your browser. They're now sort of very well recognized, robust technologies, but this was super the early days. And it felt really important to me that you could just click on a link and then be launched into these sort of multimedia environments, if you will. So I wanted to see it adopt and go faster. So as part of building the startup, I founded these early um, conferences called WebGL camps to essentially help the technology go from just kind of the creation of a technology platform to actually have applications made on the platform. It was all very early days, but it's been fun to see it develop since. And I think it's another example of that. Oh, it doesn't exist. Somebody ought to do something. Maybe it's me. So that we built a company around these early technologies as well. It was interesting.
So I love visionary. To me, there's visionary of taking this phone and making it better,
Hmm.
which is visionary. But what
Hmm.
amazes me is, like you just said, the visionary of we don't even know what a phone is, and you
Mm.
got to make it.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it captures the imagination. I think we are living through a moment like this around AI right now, where it's like, oh wow, like it's classically it's not sort of a straight line. It's these like flat parts and then acceleration. We're living through an acceleration right now, and it's once again I'm fully enraptured by when we accelerate and what that feels like, and I think we're living through it right now, which is super interesting.
Yeah, it's even more interesting that they're talking a little bit about ancient civilization had a lot of this way, way, way back, and
Hmm.
yet for some reason we weren't able, exposed, whatever the scenario was. allowed to know it, understand it, and all that, and which is also fascinating considering how did he keep it away from us for thousands of years or whatever he, she, other keep it away from us. It's fascinating. A couple others, Catalabs, and Arbricks. What was that about?
Catalabs was the name of the company we spun out of with the university, and the product we made was called Our Bricks. And the idea was basically that if you're building virtual environments that can look a lot like a three-dimensional computer game, you need all these like assets, and assets were really expensive to make. If you make sort of a character that you can use in a virtual environment or game, that would you would have to pay an artist like thousands of dollars to do that. So you needed all this content for this vision we had for this virtual reality that was way ahead of the market and its time that we were trying to build, and that was the fate of the company ahead of the market. But we so our bricks was the idea of a platform for this 3D content where you could take this content, you can make new things with it. And the word bricks is sort of a nod to Lego because Lego is from Denmark,
Yeah.
as am I. And so our bricks was this kind of idea of this like social Legos of 3D content that we could all make cool shit with.
Hey, Lego's impacted so many people, so many things. Your mind and engineering, I mean, so many things. It's an incredible company. But not last, but one more I want to chat about. I want to know how you found robotics. It was with Canvas, right? You found
Yeah,
robotics, and
yeah,
although based on how you're telling me your life's evolved, I'm not surprised you found it. But how did you find it?
yeah. I when I had sort of spun a company out of a university environment, I often thought like I thought a lot about like where do really big ideas come from? Like who makes them and how do they find their way into the market and become things like a phone or it starts somewhere. And so I had become involved in this place in San Francisco called Other Lab. You can find them at otherlab.com. It's founded by this a magnificent Australian adventurer called Saul Griffiths, who's a dear friend. And it was just a place where they were working on heroically hard research problems. And I came from my startup experience, so I was sort of the head business guy at Other Lab and helping all these different, very difficult research projects make something that was real in the world. One of them was a robotics research project that sort of was grappling with this idea that for robotics to be really useful, you have to sort of bring the task to the machine. So think about sort of a industrial robots in a car factory, and you bring the cars to them, and they can paint them really efficiently. But wouldn't it be great if you could take this incredibly capable machine and put it into the world where most of the problems exist? And they were working on themes like this. I joined that team when it was still research, and then we were like looking for a place to apply those ideas. And of all things, we found out that drywall finishing was something that had not changed since the 1950s. So the walls that you are surround yourself with are essentially a bunch of panels that are then made to look flat by this process known as finishing, so you can paint on them and it just looks like a flat continuous wall. That process was so old-fashioned and truly fit the mold of the dirty, the dull, the dangerous, which is what all people who are interested in robotics should go look for.
That's amazing. Um,
I know. To my own surprise, I found myself in robotics and construction, neither of which I'd ever had anything to do with.
Well, robotics is coming out strong. Just it was a few months ago. I was driving here in LA, and I was at a red light, and sometimes you see the robots delivering, but this was two robots standing together, waiting for the red light to change. And I'm looking at laughing at this because they're standing together waiting for the light to change, and it does, and then they both keep going. It was like two people, except there were two robots waiting for the light.
That's
Um,
hilarious. I'm sure you had come upon some film set or something because I think we're not quite at the reality yet where robots just walk among us. So maybe you fell into like a Blade Runner or something.
I don't think so.
This being LA.
It is amazing. And because I've seen him some before. There's a cool commercial on TV too, not to get too offline here, where this boy gets a delivery with the robot and he gets a scarf, puts a scarf around him. He puts those, eyes you would put on a teddy bear that wiggle around and it shows the robot looking like a person sort of now. And
That's
I
funny.
think that'll probably happen with robots. We'll make them more personified and
Hmm.
uh and things like that. It's hilarious. So now we're here, and since if I'm not mistaken, 2022, you've decided you tackled food and climate, right?
Hmm.
Um, Share how, first of all, this is a topic I really appreciate. Share how they interact, food and climate, from how fats having negative climate, not fats, how how negative climate can impact, and the critical issue of and the need for decarbonizing, food, and how it'll impact climate. Can you share a little bit about that and how you got involved in it too?
Absolutely. I connected with two very, very capable technical people, Ian McKay and Kathleen Alexander, and they were working on a very novel way to make fats as research. And they have become aware of me because I've been involved in other lab and other things about taking things out of research into commercialization. There's this very notorious sort of valley of death where research don't find its way into sort of commercial applicability. So I had done that, so they were interested in me, and they had this work that was ready to be turned into a company. So once again, I joined something when it was research. We spun out a company, and I was very, very worried about climate change, and I was very, very interested in applying myself in that fight. And I became aware of the food system, and the food system as a climate problem is shocking in so many ways.
Especially here.
It's a full third of our climate problem. So a third of the cause of the change in climate is our food system and the way we eat. And it's a part of whereas many other parts of the climate fight, we sort of have the solutions. It's just about the will to deploy them. For the mainstream consumers, we don't have an alternative to the food that we should not be eating for climate reasons, namely sort of the products of animal agriculture. So it's a third of our climate problem, but what's also completely terrifying is that the way that we make food, it won't be very resilient to a climate change planet. So once you start thinking about things like crop failures and stuff, you're just thinking about a very different planet. I like to say, remember how we all acted when it looked like we couldn't get toilet paper in the beginning of the pandemic? Now, then it sort of seems pretty plausible we're never more than sort of 2 meals away from total anarchy. So if the food system starts breaking down because it not only has caused climate change, but now will be a casualty of climate change, we are facing an unimaginable future. So food as a climate problem, being a third of the source of it, attracts something like 4% of the funding. And then you think about how high stakes it is, and then you almost have this moment when you feel like you should be running around the street screaming, "Hey, wake up, this is crazy."
It's kind of like have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
Yes, absolutely. It
Where they're trying
feels
to
a
get,
little bit like that, and people are like, well, it's like it's just it doesn't square with reality, right? It's like this enormous thing is heading towards Earth, but life looks the same. Well, it will look the same until the fucking thing hits.
right?
Food is the same way, right? It's like food is something where we throw away about half of all we produce. So there is no side of the meteor here. Like until we stop essentially like producing so much food we can just toss it away, until it actually becomes scarce on us, none of this will feel like it matters. The terrifying thing, of course, is that the climate problem tends to sort of move in these tipping points, right? So if you don't react until the problem truly reveals itself in a powerful way, maybe you won't be able to recover when that actually happens, and that would be bad.
That'd be yeah, really bad. My sons and my bonus daughter are all vegan. They weren't always, but they're all vegan. I would say I'm about 2/3 vegan. I'm still working on the cheese part. Um,
Jeez, it's hard.
but it's getting there. It's getting there, and and it shows we can make a difference if we want to, because it's taken a little bit of time. But it used to be you couldn't find anything vegan anywhere at one point, and so you just got to start.
Absolutely. Well, also one thing that's hard about it is that I think some like sub 10%, I believe about 3-4% of the population are either vegans or vegetarians. I forget what the exact numbers are, but that number has actually been kind of stable. And I think it's my oldest daughter went vegetarian for a few years, and she fought heroically, and now she eats some meat again. And I think most people just can't absorb the sacrifice of giving up this thing. And that's where it's not a deployment problem. Whereas if you have solar panels on your roof, what do you care that they shut down the coal-fired power plant? Your needs are still met for electricity, right? You don't really care. So we had a viable alternative. When it comes to food, for the mainstream palate or mainstream ability to absorb sacrifice and change. Like we just don't have the alternatives, and that's the problem. That's why food needs to be invested in.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot, just speaking for myself about things I can make, and I'm not anywhere near a cook or anything.
Right.
But I've learned from them some amazing stuff. They made vegan stuff all over the place, and and plant-based. It just makes total sense to have plant-based food. If and again, I'm not an expert. You just read about some of this stuff. It's incredible. So in a way, it is there. The food is there.
Well, one of these things that I actually don't think it's there. It's there if for those who can accept eating it, which is like too few. Whenever you sort of look into what drives buying behavior in food, you'd love to think things like climate or health, but the truth is that far and away, it's taste and price, far and away, and anything else is like distant behind that. So so if it doesn't taste well enough or at a price I want to pay, chances are it won't work. Frankly, if it tastes good at a price you want to pay, it can be total shit for your body and you'll probably eat it anyway. That's how strong these motivators are. So
Yeah.
until we can get there on taste and price, like chances are we can't decarbonize food. And then if you add things like there's something called Bennett's Law, basically as we get richer, we eat more protein, namely sort of, animal proteins. Like it's this terrifying part of the climate fight where not only are we not winning, we're actively losing. The numbers are moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen examples where, hey, when I grew up, we had tons of salt, tons of butter, tons of everything. Um, we would have sugar like crazy. I'm doing some stuff in Saudi Arabia right now where they're having problems with diabetes and obesity, and they're worried about their young population because they're drinking and eating a lot of sugar all the time. And so education plays a huge part, to say the least. So keep the faith, brother. Maybe there's a shot, maybe there's a shot.
Yeah,
You can't not keep the faith. We gotta make it happen. So,
that's very real. If you're sort of in the climate fight, like people in the climate fight talk about climate doom, which is this feeling of some people go from like denying it's real straight to doom. It's like, oh, now we're hosed anyway. We may as well. So the ability to keep the faith and sort of struggle on, what else can you do, is very, very real. And
yeah, and get the mindset out, and educate people. Like, hey, try this, try that, try whatever type of thing. But I mean, it took 2 decades to get people to sort of stop smoking. I know in Europe you still smoke more now than we do here, but got to keep trying. So what do you envision ahead for you? Short term, long term. What do you see ahead?
these days, I mostly serve as a strategic advisor to companies, and I actually started doing it not that long ago as a okay, I'm sort of want to think about what's next. Let me get out there, get some income, figure out what's next. I'm sort of finding these days that I quite like that. I don't know if I get irrational and join another company tomorrow, but right now I'm really finding that I quite help I like helping other leaders. I've sort of felt when I was in the hot seat myself, it was often hard to get the help that I really wanted. I sometimes felt like I was drowning in advice when what I really wanted was help. There's so many people said you should do this and you should do that, and I'm like, have you seen my inbox? Have you seen my calendar? It's like I should be doing many things. I should probably be doing less is the real answer, right? But
Right.
but so these days I try to help people by sort of bringing my both my experience to bear, but also my kind of roll up the sleeves mentality to sort of say, hey, I can take this on and let's do this together. Or so I'm sort of helping other leaders do what they do well. And to do this, I have these kind of harder skills to bring to bear. Over the course of my entrepreneurial career, I've raised around $100 million. So I'm sort of fairly experienced fundraiser, and I've developed like go-to-market strategies, and so I have some kind of hard skills. You can sort of go to the board and say, I need Henrik to help me because he's got these hard skills that we need that's going to bring in money. But what often ends up happening, of course, is also talking about strategy, talking about like work-life balance as entrepreneurs, talking about what's hard about it, talking about hard conversations. So I really do think the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So bringing my own experiences and my own journey and my own work on myself to bear, helping other people right now is quite fulfilling to me.
Well, it's super important because most entrepreneurs stop sometimes just before they're about to make it. because it's a hard trek, and you gotta when we do a lot of searches for founders and whatnot, bringing on their president or this, that, or whatever, they're giving away we like to call it it's like they're giving the baby to the babysitter for the first time, and please don't drop them type of thing.
Right.
But you need help. It's a lot. So I think you're providing a valuable service probably to their mental health too, at the same time. So speaking of mental health, we did have a pandemic.
Sure.
One of my clients told me a long time ago, I guess it was in 2021. He said, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly.
Mm.
And I thought, what a great line that was.
Totally.
And
Totally.
in a way, it almost feels to a lot of people like it still was yesterday and years ago at the same time. So with all that said, here we are, Fast and Furious in 2025 already. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
I am, I mean, speaking of mental health, I spent quite a bit of time and energy working on my mental health. I'm a huge believer in doing the inner work. I actually think as leaders, we are more obligated than other people to do our inner work because our shit rolls downhill to other people, and the more shit there is to roll, that we have not taken care of ourselves. So I'm a huge believer in doing the inner work.
Hmm.
So I think my life is just better for it, whether it's in my romantic relationships or in my relationship to my kids, but certainly also in my relationship to others. And what I think it has done for me and what I feel very grateful for is I feel like by doing the inner work, I've created a space inside of me so that when other people come to me, whether in the context of work or elsewhere, with issues, they are less likely to budge up against my issues because I sort of know what they are. I know what my stories and my triggers are. So I'm really grateful that people alerted me to this idea of inner work so I could go on this journey. I feel more alive than I've ever been. And I am now, in my early 50s. And this inner work has opened my eyes and I think my heart to leading a much more full life.
No, that's awesome. Well, I think you're probably now being able to, you said, because of that, being able to help people a lot more too.
Right.
Because not only as a role model, but as the even preventing them from making mistakes they don't have to make because of your experience. So I'm grateful that I got a new friend finally. And I'm actually grateful and hopeful that you are a leader who cares, and you're bringing it to the table. So thanks for sharing, and thanks for being on our series.
I loved it, Mark. Thank you for your time.